Eric, welcome to Humans of AI. Thank you very much for being here. I want to get started with you introducing yourself and telling us what you do, and then we'll dive into the story.
Of course. I'm Eric. I am CISO at Writer. I couldn't be happier to be here. My main focus is making sure that both our employees and our customers are secure, not just when it comes to using AI, but understanding what those risks are and how we plan on not just mitigating them, but being holistic about our approach when it comes to security.
So, you got an unconventional start to your career. Before we get into the complexities of I would love to start with that. What drew you into the world, or what drew you from the world where you started to the world of cybersecurity? And was there a particular moment early on, a puzzle that you solved, or a system that you broke, or a crisis that you witnessed that made you say, "Oh, yeah, this is where I want to go next"?
Yeah. So I was a line cook in New York City, cooking professionally, and I was working at a restaurant that had a sensitive situation happen that piqued my curiosity and understanding more on what was happening on the company computer at the bottom of this restaurant in New York City. And so I did something that is frankly illegal, which was I taught myself how to use a tool called Metasploit, which is a known hacking and attacking framework where I was able to deploy malware. I taught myself how to do this on YouTube and just watched videos and just redid the entire thing. Malware on the company laptop, the company computer, and used it to scan for files to see what information the restaurant business had on me. To which my boss at the time had a Cisco certification, and his background was in like Cisco networking. And he noticed that there was a shell beaconing back to an IP, to which he just did a little bit of analysis and realized, oh, Eric worked at the Apple store in college. He may have a little bit more of a technical understanding than most. Let me ask him. And he caught me, and I'm too honest to a fault. And he said, you need to quit your job and you need to get into security. And I said, why? He said, because you have a personality and you can have a conversation. And if you taught yourself how to do this, you could probably figure out anything. And so I've generally speaking been failing upward since then. I don't know everything. I never am going to claim to. I'm not the most technical person. I'm not the smartest in any room. I like to pride myself on having a really good EQ and low ego and being willing to learn and figure out what makes sense. Generally speaking, I think what I learned from being in a kitchen is that there's always a way to move and figure out how to solve a problem. I look at things in terms of, okay, let's say you're in a restaurant, you need to put out 17 different orders of eggs during brunch. 3 are over easy, 5 are scrambled, another, whatever amount are poached. It's like, how do you do all of this coordination and chaos at once under like such extreme pressure? And it actually translates extremely well to security because when it comes to dealing with incidents, whether it's you're dealing with an ongoing DDoS attack or there's an insider threat that you see information leaking data, you have to be able to be not just multi-threaded when it comes to like thinking about problem sets, but you have to be calm and you have to be able to think, how am I trying to isolate this issue, identify a root cause of what happened, ensure that we maintain integrity of our data while also protecting the business. And so I think, believe it or not, the entire like spectrum of cooking kind of like led me to be successful in the security industry.
Yeah, I've never ever thought about how being a line cook relates to being a cybersecurity specialist. But I'm also relating to the fact that time is not on your side in either one of these situations. It's aggravated even more now that we have AI. And I'm curious how you, as a person, are changing alongside this technology. And if we could talk to like the Eric that started out, what would be the biggest difference between how he approaches security then versus how you approach it today?
I think first and foremost, there's two different ways to think about security. There's security within a company and how you protect it, and then there's security for how you enable and protect your customers. And when I first started, I didn't think about either one of those things. My whole thing was just understanding what was bad and how to find out what's bad. And while that still largely applies, I think about this in terms of trust. How am I building trust with my coworkers and my peers? And how am I helping build trust with customers? Because at the end of the day, security comes down to trust. They are trusting us with their data. They're trusting us with our platform. They're trusting us with automation. They're trusting us with critical workflows. And so we have to be able to show them that we think about security in a way that's not just holistic, but gives that sense of comfort that our platform is what it says it is from an enterprise security perspective. So I bring this up because when I think about security, I try to talk about it in terms of pragmatism and I talk about it in terms of culture because security comes down to culture. It is not just one team. There may be one team that's the subject matter experts and the ones responsible for it, but security is a shared model. It requires engineers. It requires the marketing team. It requires the finance team. It is a multi-threaded proficiency that you need everyone to participate. For example, finance and marketing teams are usually the first ones to get phished. Why? Because they're the ones that have access to a lot of customer data. They're the ones that have access to the most critical information as pertains to money. And so we need them to be aware of like what a phishing email looks like. When it comes to developer workflows, they need to be aware of what are like insecure libraries that they may be using and why. What's the vulnerability around that? What are bad practices to think about? And so it's a culture thing. And I say that security is kind of multi-threaded on both internal and external because you want to build a culture of internal security that resonates with your brand to build trust with your customers.
So at a place like Writer, we are growing incredibly. I mean, it's exponentially every year. We are 10xing, or I don't remember what the stat is, but we're growing fast. And I'm sure there's got to be a tension there, right? Between the drive for innovation, the drive for growth, and it feels like a force of nature, but that collides with your mandate for security. And is there a specific moment where you've had to kind of be that guardrail or, that culture enforcer and say, stop, hold on, we need to think about security here?
Oh, I would say if not every second of every day. I think broadly in general, most places I've gone, I've tried to institute this concept of like security rewards where we enable people to report to us not just like security misconfigurations, but issues that they may even create themselves. And what we do is reward them for doing that by paying them either in a gift card or some type of monetary format. And the reason why is because it is a culture thing. And so I use that as a way of incentivizing how to block and identify issues because the person that makes the mistake is going to know a lot better than me just due to context. As for specific scenarios, I look at security in a unique way where there's really two buckets of issues that kind of tie back to the same concept. And when I think about this, and this is subjective, so I imagine some people have strong opinions about this. Security issues largely come down to like one of two problems, which is like poorly written code that has like some type of business logic failure or a misconfiguration that leads to over permissions. And both these things, whether it's logic failure that leads to data leakage or fail open access, or a misconfiguration that leads to somebody being able to do privilege escalation or some type of execution to grab some type of information, they both point back to role based access control and least privilege. And so, in general, I think of this in terms of how do you build a model that enables people and code and computational resources and longer term, in this instance, agents in a way to do their job with the tools they need so that they have the perfect amount of permissions that does not create risk for a business. And whether that's being done through automation via something like just in time access, or if that's being done through some proper change management, the reality is you need this concept to be able to scale a security program inside out. And I look at this as a core component because it often is interpreted as adding friction when I see it as velocity for people to do what they need to in a secure way. And so this
Mhm.
is something I think about daily. I think about this in terms of how our application is built inside out from services authenticating each other and what type of access do they need to have when it comes to data going from one service to another. I think about this in terms of how we're leveraging MCP and rolling that out, specifically how one plugin is going to integrate another and how we cache set values that come back. So it's all about access and data and what that looks like. And I think it's something that we think about every single day from soup to nuts. And to go further, a lot of people talk about AI security and they often point to this new paradigm. And one of the things I really want to try to, I don't want to say debunk, but put out there for people to think about is we're at a time where this is technology that's new. And because it's new, it's no different than being able to have an inside employee that works at a company that is going to have access to something to do a certain job. It's having this intern or this junior employee execute on tasks that allow them to do it with a larger knowledge base that can be a little bit faster, by a little bit faster, a lot faster, and they have more rapid access to information. I think we've often confused what this new technology looks like. It's no different in a lot of ways than moving to the cloud in like the early 2010s. Here's infrastructure, and we're now moving this infrastructure to a remote environment. And so I really want people to think about role based access control. I want people to think about the concept of least privilege access, because if we can leverage that and use it across the board, we've built this model for security that stretches not just across your culture, but across your technology and builds that trust with your customers.
You have this kind of meta role because you're not only building a security program within Writer as an internal organization, but then you're also extending that knowledge out and your expertise into how we're rolling out security in our product and how we're talking about security to our customers. And you're kind of being that avatar for us to lean on. I know that you've acted as a subject matter expert on the upcoming white paper that we were creating called the Agentic Compact. The articles of the compact is really focused on, you touched on this before, about treating agents as though they are your interns, your employees that are just like they're ready to go. They want to get as many resources as possible to execute on this, but you have to be able to build in reasonable guardrails without stymieing them. Do you feel like you're seeing challenges now that your peers are about to see in 6 months? Or where do you think your peers are at right now?
That's a great question. I think there's two different areas that we're starting to venture into. One is, how are LLMs and AI as a whole being used to identify new types of vulnerabilities and new types of techniques that attackers use? And we've seen Google even release data recently on building internal tools and technology that allow them to be able to find new vulnerabilities that are novel. And so this is extremely powerful, because what it not only gives the defender, the internal security person, the ability to do is start thinking about new types of attacks they have to defend against, but also it gives the attacker, the black hat, the activist, whatever it may be, the ability to learn new ways to attack. And so it's this double-edged sword of velocity on both ends. And so I think as we continue to see more tools and products come out from companies that are building with AI and using AI and building LLMs, we're seeing this unique velocity as it pertains to application security that we haven't really seen to date, which is why we've seen the NPM vulnerability come out recently. I just think people are now thinking of new novel ways, or more creative ways to kind of attack environments. So that's one. I think that's something that we have to think about is what is the new age form of a 0 day look like, and how do we respond to that?
Well, let me stop you there for a second before you move on, because this brings in the red team culture, right? Of how creative can you get within your own team attacking your own products? And is there a story that, obviously you don't want to get into too much detail, but is there a story about a discovery that revealed the unique nature of AI systems that maybe you weren't anticipating?
Recently, we've been building out agents to do functional tasks of what you would see from an application security team, of not just doing analysis against code, but trying to identify what we call as reachability, meaning if a vulnerability or some type of poor practice is seen within a code base, if I'm an attacker, is this reachable? Because the reality is, if the code is doing something that could be exploited, ideally there's still layers of defense and depth that are within your application, meaning we have the application running within a Kubernetes cluster, and the Kubernetes cluster has some sort of hardening mechanism around it, which is in AWS, which has ideally some sort of hardening around IAM, which then is protected by a web application firewall. So there's areas of defense and depth. What we've been trying to do is ask ourselves, can this not only find a misconfiguration and vulnerability, but can it do a reachable analysis? Whether that's creating and probing and automatically running an exploit against what it finds. And what we're starting to see is that we can leverage this to do what I call purple teaming. Purple teaming is this concept that I've tried to build a few security programs around where every single person on your team has both the attacker mindset and uses that atomic red teaming or that attacker type of methodology to build defensive practices and protocols and controls. And we're trying to build our agents internally here to have specific sub agents that do specific tasks that are both defensive and offensive in their nature. And if we can leverage this, we ideally can start to build a really, really secure platform in a way that hasn't existed. And for me, I believe like knowledge is power. And if we can not just enable ourselves to do this internally, but also start to educate our customers and our peers on how we're doing this, I think the sky is the limit. And yes, there's a risk of teaching bad actors that methodology, but I believe knowledge should be free. And what I want to do is help raise the tide for all of our partners and our customers to understand how we leverage agents so that they can start to do it internally too. Because the reality is these agents have access to data and information that we can't even begin to store just due to how our brains work in comparison to RAM and memory as a whole. And I think as we educate people on what agents are and how you delegate subtasks and how you're doing that from a security perspective, no different than building a security program in an organization where you have a junior application security engineer and a senior application security engineer and a principal who all have different functions and different tasks. If you think about what their scope is and break it down and do that based on how agents would work, you really start to build this model of getting high accuracy. Now, it's important to note AI doesn't solve every problem. I think it has a lot of the same risks that humans have, which is human error. I always tell people like AI has been built with human error baked into it. So there's always going to be risk, and you have to validate what it has as an output. And that's where figuring out the right middle ground of human in the loop, but it gives us more ability to solve security problems at a faster rate.
As you were describing basically the security layer within the agent, and it's basically a security agent within an agent, it just brought to mind like this whole idea of cellular structure and how you have, you have an immune system built around it. And it's almost like this organic structure starts happening. I don't know if you've thought about that way, but it does feel like that. When I say that, does that bring into mind anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than how DNA is wired together, and each molecule has a different component and function that builds out this entire body, and that's how a company operates. I think if there's one thing I really want to hit home on, it's that agents and AI is no different than a human breathing company or employees of a human breathing company. It's just they have less context up front until you give it their context and the ability to do something. And so if companies have a DNA that's made up of their people, their processes, their tools and technology, and that's what the cellular structure is of any business, that's exactly what agents are going to be able to provide to businesses in this way. So it not only resonates with me from that perspective, but if you think about maximizing how agents work, if every cell or atom, whatever it is written and programmed in a hyper specific way to create this structure of cells that creates a body or a human or a muscle or whatever it may be, that's ideally how I want to think about agents is giving hyper granular function and tasks to reduce hallucination and ideally increase value add and throughput. That's where I see the most added value. And again, I am by no means the smartest person in the room and subject matter expert on this stuff. And I'm sure people would push back on some of this. One of the things we're even exploring is like, how do you think about small language models for this? Because if you have a tighter and a smaller language model with more accurate data, but smaller amounts of it, the computational resources, they definitely become easier to leverage, but also its hallucination rate's going to go down because it has a smaller data set it's working against. And so we're even exploring the concept of like small language models for each agent to increase that velocity.
Are there any security principles that, I mean, you're a bit of a renegade, let's put it that way. But are there any like security principles in the industry that you're fighting against that are just like, we need to get over this mindset, or a non-negotiable that you think is essential for building this trust between humans and AI agents, for example?
Oh man. Yes. I'm going to go with the larger meta one, and then I'll go with the more granular one. The entire security industry is based on fear tactics because it's what has been sold. There's never really been, when you think about finance, people use credit score as a way of mitigating risk to understand whether or not you're a safe investment. for them when giving them credit. There's nothing like that in the security industry. And so CISOs and security leaders have long struggled to make a business justification to get the right tools, investment in technology to mitigate risk. And they've used fear as a way of doing it of we will be hacked, we will be this. And in my opinion, I think security is a sell on added value of any product or platform. And it's like, how do we start tying that to ROI of customer retained, platform retained, and data stored? There's a few different frameworks that kind of exist for this, and no one's really nailed it right. But I would love to dispel this concept of like security is a cost center and it's built on fear. It actually is what keeps your business up and running. And it's directly tangible to ROI. And when we think about this with protecting agents, if agents are no different than an employee, if in the way that we're looking at this model, then we're enabling agents to do the tasks and functions of a business faster, ideally more efficiently and effectively to enable a business to be much more profitable and have better velocity. So that's one. There's another concept, depending on what type of companies you work at, where there's a term in security called shift left, which is how do we move as far left as possible to identify the security vulnerabilities that exist. I totally believe that that's an important thing, but I've seen a lot of companies solely index on shift left, which can be disabling developer velocity, or it could be stopping people from being able to ship product. And in my opinion, security is a full spectrum thing. You need to be able to know what's happening and respond to what's happening as much as you need to be able to stop it up front. And the reason why I bring this up is because as we build agents, the point of it is to release it and actually use it to be able to be more efficient for your business. And we need to also be able to respond to what they're doing. Let's say you have an agent that you happen to accidentally over permission, and that agent is able to access, let's say, something like Notion and or Jira. What if it starts, God forbid, hallucinating and it accesses that data? You need to be able to have the visibility to respond to it. And so one of the things I want to dispel is this concept that shift left is everything. It is so important, but you need to be able to have the visibility to respond. That's why I think there's this huge paradigm of misunderstanding in the security space. But moreover, with AI, I think it's new technology and people are afraid, but it does not change the security model really in any way than hiring a new employee or a bunch of really, really intelligent consultants.
You're having conversations with CISOs, I'm assuming, quite often. And when you say that, agents are basically, you need to treat them like they're a new employee, how are they responding to that? Is that something that they can get with, or they're like, well, yeah, but
I think it depends on the risk tolerance of the business. Having spoken with top 10, top 50 banks, I think they're more concerned with the data sprawl and the access to the data and understanding how do you harden that, which goes back to the shift left thing, which is super important. I totally agree with that. But my counter argument to them is if you're going to grant access to an IT employee to all these different tools that you use for efficiency for every employee, HubSpot, Notion, Jira, Slack, Microsoft Office, whatever it may be, if you're granting them access to that and said subfolders, how is that any different than an agent? In fact, I would argue that you could probably respond faster to an agent because it's ideally connected to your network rather than a human who, once they have access to the information and they store it on a drive, they could walk away and do whatever they want. And you have to be able to cache in that moment. So I think it depends on the risk profile and the threat model. I've seen some companies start to be more amenable to it, and some businesses, because what they're starting to understand is, wow, you are right. It's just applying this model that previously existed to a new realm. And that's where I make the comparison of cloud in 2010, of people moving off of rack and stack in their closet, in their server closet, and moving to AWS or GCP or Oracle or Azure, and applying network security controls to the cloud and applying least privileged access through IAM to the cloud. And so it's the same thing, but I think about it as an internal employee. Now, I want to be clear. This technology is all very new. And so there's going to be more security risks up front than not, just because people are looking to innovate. And generally speaking, when you're innovating, you're building for what's possible, not for what's the most secure. And so it's on not just myself, but the rest of the people in this industry to start identifying what is the right way to deploy MCP? What is the right way to harden LLM? How do we think about data poisoning and prompt injection? And so I challenge not just myself, but our peers to really continue to push and alongside the innovation, begin to identify the different ways that we can be protecting businesses so that we have hardened models, we have hardened agents, and we have hardened access control because again, it comes down to access.
What's making you really excited as you're looking, you are on the forefront, you're on the cutting edge. You gave a little bit of a glimpse as far as the purple teaming, but what's some other stuff that's getting you excited that you're like, oh, we need to dive into this more?
One of the things that I think has kind of been this end state of security of how to get there is how can we tie our security findings and our risk mitigation to an actual dollar amount that's reflective of something that exists in the industry. And because we can use AI, because we know that this is great at math. We know if there's one thing AI is good at, it is great at any type of STEM related task or function. What I would love to see is how we can either use the FAIR framework or something similar to really take every single finding we have, map it to what is known in the industry, whether it's through the Verizon DBIR report or through the Ponemon Institute research, whatever it may be, taking this information and being able to start tying a dollar amount so that we could show the ROI that we're actually providing to a business. The second thing that I really love the idea of is how can you have these agents start to do anomaly detection in your environment better than a human can? Because historically speaking, a lot of this has been built on static alerts of like, hey, we noticed that Alora, for example, is accessing Salesforce and isn't on the sales team. That's a suspicious event. Well, how do we have an agent continually learn against the baseline of your data to do anomaly detection to start identifying even earlier events that are suspicious? And I don't just mean an event that's never fired before, but ideally correlation of a series of events. So an example would be you're first logging in from an IP that we've never seen before. That's a suspicious event. Well, then we're also seeing that you're putting in requests to access a specific drive within Google Drive that has access to a lot of customer data. Well, maybe you need to do that for your role, but should you be accessing that based on the historical balance of what it is? Can we start having these different data sets be correlated by AI to identify vulnerabilities faster than a human could and not having to rely on the static automation that long existed?
That seems like a perfect use case because it's all about pattern recognition. And that's what AI does to even, generate its output. So it seems like that would be a beautiful fit there. It just means it needs more, well, it needs more access. It needs more access to systems, Eric.
That's that's the irony of it is how do you give it access to not just the data really, but in a secure way so that it can't be used against you? Because that's the other component. At the end of the day, these agents and how they're storing memory and using the data is no different than a human with a database. It's just how are we thinking about that relationship as it pertains to each other?
When you step back from all of this, from this world of the CISO, and what, like, as a human, not to say that CISOs aren't humans, but, it's just Eric. What's the promise that you're seeing in this age? Like, what is it that you are like, wow, I am witnessing a true inflection point in human existence?
It's scary. It's scary, and I don't mean to scare people with me saying that, but someone on my team, Jonathan Haas, often says to me, "What do we want to do? Because we can truly build anything. We have the ability, like especially in the last month, between some of the features that Anthropic and OpenAI and even us internally have been able to build like we're making massive changes of how you can essentially generate an application to do whatever function or task you want because the reality is it just again needs the access. We've been able to start building tools internally that we would traditionally buy off the shelf, and it's incredible to see what the velocity of my team looks like with just using these tools and technology. And I say it because on one hand, it's like the power is in the eye of the beholder, but it's and with great power comes great responsibility. But I see the opportunity for non-technical people to one, learn anything. I'm trying to get in the habit of using AI to constantly not just give me an answer, but fish out of me what I think the answer should be so that I'm learning along the way and not just like being lazy and using my brain. But I'm also being given technical ability that I have never necessarily had. I'm not a traditional software engineer by trade. I've taught myself everything and figured it out and have been like quote unquote hacking my way through life. And now with AI, I can get as deep and granular on specific topics that I've never had access to before, whether it be cryptography or the deepest components of networking. Like there's so many concepts, and because of that, the sky is truly the limit in how you build a security program, how you secure a company, and also how you implement tools and technology. Because we can build anything. And Jonathan says this to me. He's like, "So what do you want to do? What do we want to build?" And the truth is, we can build anything, which is amazing because you can now start building a security program unique to every single business. You don't have to necessarily build this box that is a replay of what you've seen across the board. Maybe that's needed, but the truth of the matter is, depending on the type of data you collect, depending on how your business makes money, depending on what your profit margins look like, depending on what access needs to be for whatever resource or tool or technology, you could build a security program for every single task, function, or component to be binary and fluid in any way you want. And so this gives us the ability to build developer tools. Netflix dubbed this term the paved road approach in security, where it was the first time of how do we build a road that any developer can ship code on and any developer can use so that they're not only shipping code and working iteratively, but there's no foot guns for them to necessarily shoot themselves. And so I sit here and I think to myself, we can now do that unique to our business for whatever the use case may be. And that is such a rare opportunity. I'm also seeing opportunity where there's going to be so many more businesses, so many more people that can learn so quickly to how to hack and do whether it's red teaming or offensive security or bug researching to blue team protocols for reverse engineering malware. Like you can truly learn anything in this and build any tool. And so I think security programs are going to become a lot more adaptive, which is very different than what we've historically had in the industry.
I'm hearing, well, obviously a lot of enthusiasm, but I'm also like, you're somebody who you love the opportunity to learn something new. I'm sensing that from you. Would that be true?
Oh my God, of course. I mean, I'm the fool that jumped into blockchain and blockchain security in 2015 before it was even an industry. And so I think I take on a ton of risk for who I am. But I always look at this like they're subject matter experts based on the fact that this industry has existed because machine learning and natural language processing have been around for a while. Agents and AI in this format and the access to it hasn't, but like generally speaking, NLP and ML has existed for a while. I look at this as an opportunity that there aren't a ton of SMEs in this space, and we all can become that. And I have an opportunity to learn and try to innovate and work with people who I think are smarter than me, everyone on my team in their specific areas, whether it's Ben Paratus on my team, who's right now, thinking about our cloud security and zero trust access, or it's Jonathan Haas, who's building tools like end to end, or Damian Kahn, who's really thinking about identity as a whole here. And how do we think about humans as entities and data points for us to secure every single attribute as it pertains to that? When I think about this, I think about all of us being able to kind of raise our tide together because we're all learning this as we go. There's just a wealth of knowledge and information, and we're going to make mistakes. Everyone does, and I'm aware of that. It's just can we respond quickly? And so, to the original point, I love getting into spaces where we're all drinking from the fire hose day to day because we all have to learn. There are few, not a ton of SMEs, and so if we have the opportunity to learn collectively, and I learn from my peers and vice versa, then we're just going to only benefit not only at Writer, but we're going to benefit with our customers as well.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about?
All I ask is that people be more open minded to trying this technology out and thinking about their workflow on their day to day and think about the most annoying little menial task that can be helped made more efficient by using this. Because the reality is the efficiency gain will unlock other areas of your life. And for any business that's, apprehensive on trying this or apprehensive on dipping their feet into the water of this, they have an opportunity to help their business not only continue to expand and grow, but they themselves have an opportunity to learn more and be a subject matter expert in whatever field they want. And so I urge people to, with caution and ideally with least privilege access, try this technology out and not be afraid because there's so much to learn. This is like day one of Google first being released and you could search the internet. we now have that in a completely different format.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Eric. Your passion is palpable. Your enthusiasm is contagious. And I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you.